Welcome all. Sorry that we starting a little bit late. Poor Michelle's had a bit of a eventful afternoon, early evening. Can people hear me okay? Just put it in the message or put your great. Thank you. I'm just going to switch my phone off because it has a tendency to make odd noises every so often. And then we will start. There we go. Yeah, if people could, hopefully people are muted, but if everyone who's not asking questions or anything like that can mute, that would be great. Just to introduce myself, I'm Yoni Ejo, and I'm an adopter. I'm an adopted adult. I was transracially adopted at 18 months old. And I'm also a social worker and social work manager and adoption coach. And I'm doing some of these masterclasses because I strongly believe that we need, as adopters and special guardians and foster carers, we need as much information as we can possibly get, and the best practice really. And so it felt like something that I really wanted to offer to people. So huge welcome. And I'd like to introduce Michelle, who's going to talk about life story work and life story books. Michelle has a diploma in social work and in therapeutic life story work. She's been a panel advisor, fostering practice manager, and supervised social workers. And she's worked with children with complex needs and assessment, duty and assessment. Very, very experienced. It's lovely to have you. Because we've got a limited amount of time, I'm not going to ask people to introduce themselves, but if you could put in the chat whether you're an adopter, a foster carer, or a special guardian or professional, that would be immense, so that we know who's here. And I will hand over to Michelle and hopefully share my screen.
Yeah, because I'm useless with technology, so one of the things I need to get much better at, I think.
Yes. Is that showing?
Yeah, that's showing.
Okay, I'll just do it from the beginning, hopefully. And so I just need to, might need to let people in. Okay. Actually, Michelle, if anyone comes, yeah, I'll let people in as I can see them, hopefully.
Okay.
All right, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so Yoni's already introduced me, but again, I'm Michelle, and I'm a therapeutic life story work practitioner. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm nervous. I'll tell you that. Not a thing I often do, something like this, but it's very exciting and I'm glad to be here. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of just, talk about the therapeutic life story work really, and the therapeutic life story work model. And so the training I did was with Richard Rose. He's written quite a lot of books on life story work and undertakes life story work himself. So I just thought it would be good to think about your day. And just, if you've got a pen and paper handy, just write down what your day was like today. What went well today? What's not gone particularly well today? This is quite apt for me because it was all right this morning, but this afternoon coming with a flat tire, just getting off the motorway and realising one of your tyres is down to 85 when it's meant to have 200 of whatever it's supposed to have in it, air, I presume that's what it is. Realising that and realising you've got to pump up your tyre in order to get home. And then think about what have you got left over from your day. And are you still thinking about that? Are you still thinking about what's left over from the day? And how does that make you feel? Having that left over from the day, something that you've not resolved or something that's gone particularly well. And then just hold those thoughts, because I'm going to come back to those in a little while. Okay. You want me to move on? If you've written down what you need to write down, then I'll move on to the next slide. And the next slide just has my questions on, Yoni, so you can skip that one. Go on.
Okay.
So life story work, it's a trauma-informed intervention, and it takes between 9 to 12 months. It's about 18 sessions, and it's for children that are age 5 to 18 plus. And I think there's more research at the moment in looking at care experience that adults wanting to take on and do pieces of life story work around their journey and their experiences. The style of life story work that we do is always done with a primary carer, and the life story work practitioner works alongside to support the child or the adolescent or the young person to make meaning of their life, exploring that and forming a coherent narrative around that, understanding their emotions and behaviours to gain choice and, you know, to have control over and master their own emotional expression and their regulation and co-regulation also, you know, alongside their carer, to build meaningful and safe relationships, connections and attachment with your carer, and to be able to form those attachments with other people also. So that's what we aim to do when we complete a piece of life story work with a child, adolescent or young person. So it comes in 3 stages. So for us, if you go on to the next slide, Yoni, there's an information bank, and the information bank really is, you know, looking at the information that's available. That just doesn't come from social work files. That comes from people, significant people, members of the family, thinking about what else is kind of available to look at to build that information bank. And for us, really, it's the sense around, you know, thinking about what we already know, what we don't know, how we're going to fill those gaps, who's got the information to fill those gaps, what's safe to share, you know, what can we share with the child at their age, because we've got to meet the child where they're at when we do the piece of life story work also. And then thinking about, you know, what would the child want to know about their life and their life story work. So, you know, thinking about what their experiences are and what they would want to know from us. And really it's around the quality of that information bank. It's really important, because you need to know more information as the life story work practitioner than the child does. And your basis of understanding of their life needs to be really good. Hence the information bank is a really important part of that work and starting that work. And also it's moving forward and being able to share with primary carers and the child that information, and also say other alternative carers that might look after the child. The second stage is around internalising that information, and we use wallpaper to do that, where we chart information onto wallpaper, and we're so we're bringing all of the information together, and we're doing that through play. I'm probably moving forward on the slides a little bit quicker than perhaps I'm asking Yoni to move now. So it's like you move on to, there's another one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I've moved too quickly. It's me. I'm speeding ahead. So it's dealing with, you know, the feelings around the child in a life, and, you know, thinking about that we don't always have to agree with the child's narrative. It might be incorrect, but that's their narrative. So, you know, we have to listen to their narrative, and then we have to look at, you know, what information is around that narrative, to share that narrative in a way that where the child's able to externalize that information and then be able to internalize that, because children need to be able to express their own views before they can internalize that information themselves. And so the wallpaper does that, because we put all the information on that wallpaper, and that's to help the child reach a stage of understanding and to look at reframing what's happened for themselves and problem solve some of the things that have happened in their lives for themselves.
So, Michelle, do you mean literally wallpaper?
Yeah, literally wallpaper. Yeah, literally wallpaper. And like, you know, pretty, I haven't even got any in the shed. I've got a case for the wallpaper, but no wallpaper in the shed, I'm afraid. But like the most thickest denier of wallpaper is what we use, because we kind of roll it out and roll it back and walk all over it and do all sorts with it. So it needs to be pretty robust, really. But that's basically what we use. We just use wallpaper. So I think thinking about that internalization, if we think about kind of the foundations for some of the work that we do, and some of that is around Bowlby. You move on to the next slide.
Yeah,
he used the term internal working model, and it's how that internal working model is split, and it's looking at the self, and you know, having a perception of the self, a perception of others and the world, and just thinking about, you know, that we all need those connections, don't we? We all need to build relationships, and it's thinking about, you know, when there is a stressor or a threat, that we need other people to help us to manage those stresses or that threat or that problem. And so, you know, if it is that we either seek or we avoid situations, so it's like thinking about the past experiences and how that will impact on the self, and you know, what's happening for that child within that situation. And so when you're thinking about the self, you're thinking about a child needs to be loved, and we need to show children that they're worthy of love, and we need to make them feel that, and to feel that they're worthy of that love. And then, you know, when you're thinking about others, it's looking at what's happened to that child, what's happened in their early experiences, and how that impacts on them. So how their care needs were met by other people is then how they view the world. So the world can either be a safe place or a dangerous place. And what we're looking to do with the life story work is to make them feel safe, so that they can express their self, so that they can externalize in order to internalize the information, and they can look at that narrative and think about how that narrative can be a different narrative for them. So within that, we're kind of looking at what drives the child. And this is a quote from Thalberg. And it, you know, it says the very fact that adults hesitate to share information about the past with a child, to him, that his past is so bad that they won't be able to cope with it. Whatever the past was, the child has lived through it and survived. So they can live with the truth, and the truth can be presented in harmful ways that lowers the child's self-esteem, or in a way that helps the child to understand that, accept his past, and thus raise his self-esteem. And I think that's one of the go-to quotes in the work around life story work with Richard Rose. So it's looking at, you know, what drives the child, thinking about, you know, their present issues, present difficulties. People often ask, you know, is it re-traumatizing for children to have life story work? But our concept is to do no harm. So what we're doing is, you know, we're sharing that information with the child, because, you know, they've already lived through that, and they've already survived that particular situation. So it's like presenting the truth, and everyone has a story within that within that information. So everyone has a story to tell. Everyone has their own story, and you bring in everyone's story into the Peace Life story work. Richard talks quite a lot about the ghosts and the monsters that live inside of us, and listening to children's perceptions and kind of valuing their experiences. We can look at labeling what the past ghosts were and what the monsters are also inside the child. And with the carer, that helps to promote the child's best interest. Everyone okay?
It's really interesting. Are people okay to ask a question if they've got one, Michelle?
Somebody's put their thumb up, so Lynn's okay. Thanks, Lynn. Owen. Oh, someone's got their hand up. Is it
Hello.
Hi.
Helena, yes. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was a little bit late because bedtime. So can you just repeat for me? This work you're talking, we do, who does it and when? All this, yeah.
So the model I'm talking about is the therapeutic life story work that's undertaken with a therapeutic practitioner and a carer. So the primary carer for that child normally undertakes that work. That's not to say that there are not other ways for people to do pieces of work with their children. So there are things like, all about me books and looking at the present and what's going on in the present. That's all about me. I would say that, whilst, life story work is really important and some children really need that. There are other children where if you were to chart their lives with an all about me book, and you were to do that all about me book frequently enough, you would have quite a lot of information about them in their present. And you'd be looking at their future also, wouldn't you? You might not have the information then about the past, but what you would have is information about the present and information about the future. Yeah. So in particular now I'm talking about therapeutic life story work and that model.
Okay, thank you very much.
So if you move to the next slide, Ioni, please. So this slide is just about, child brain development and kind of looking at, the stages of that and how and what children need in order to kind of move through those stages. And I suppose many of us can think about our own lives and our own childhoods and things that have happened to us, and sometimes it's hard to know, isn't it, whether or not you know that information because someone's told it to you so many times, or whether you actually recall that information yourself. So whether it's an unconscious thing or whether it's a conscious thing, it's that. So and over the passage of time, stories change and move, don't they? Things get added and things get taken away, and it's kind of just thinking about that. So when we have children who live with alternative families and who are not their birth families and who have lived in a number of family situations, they often don't have those people around them to recount stories, from their childhood and from their past. And so for those children, they might have emotions and feelings, and they might understand things very differently. And, and that's what impacts on their, internal working model and the mistrust of adults. And their feeling that the world's not safe. And if we think about that, if we think about the fact that, trauma is a series of events that occur, and, how those events impact, unless you can change that narrative, continues to impact on people when they've suffered trauma. So it's just thinking about how to develop and support children with some of the shame that they have and some of the blame that exists, and some of the feelings of sadness and badness that are around, and looking at, the misconceptions and how they get wired into the brain. And one of the key aims of the life story work is to provide that narrative and to help the child understand their history and the impact of that on their behaviour, and for them to understand that it's not their fault, and that they're loved and they're lovable, and that they deserve better parenting, and that adults can be trusted, and finally think about their hopes for the future, really, what their hopes are for the future, what their carers' hopes are for them in the future. So if you move on to the next slide, it's just understanding, your child's behaviour and thinking about, again, how certain traumas and certain things that have happened might increase aggression, distrust, and how those things impact. And once children have moved even to a safer environment, their brains and bodies might not recognise that danger's past, and that these habits that they have, these behaviours that they have, they're protective, and it's retraining some of those things so that we can, we're not in survival mode, and actually we're able to make children feel safe. Can we move on to the next slide? So this is just about emotional regulation and some of the things that people might do with children to, calm down. I'm sure you've all got your own ideas and things that you might do with your children at work, or that other people do with their children at work. It's just thinking about, how to prepare yourself for, the times when that, because I think of the brain as the middle part of the brain being like the fire alarm, so that bit going off and having to, implement some support around the child in order that they can regulate themselves. And often, carers are the people that have to be that person to support in those situations. And it's, how you would kind of do that, and some ideas around how you might want to do that. And you may have your own. And I just wanted to show you, so what I want to ask is that no one takes any pictures, because these are actually pieces of children's work that I've got next. So I kind of don't want anyone to be taking any pictures of them. I hope they're the right way around, because the way I've printed it out doesn't look like they are. Oh yeah. So I worked with a young girl who had experienced the toxic trio, so drugs and alcohol at home, domestic violence, and mental health. And so there were lots of situations in school where she would be pulled up for particular situations where she was using, say, the wrong language. And so we kind of looked at the brain and how the brain works. I'm not a great drawer, so I can't draw really good stuff. So I just kind of, it just was, we just drew it like this. And we just talked about the fact that, the bottom of the brain develops first. And often that can be about surviving certain situations where your needs are not being met in the home. And that the middle part of the brain is around your emotions, how you might feel, the senses. And then the top of the brain is the thinking brain. And how sometimes when children are in situations whereby their needs are not met, they're not able to develop all parts of the brain. And then sometimes language isn't what others would want language to be. And this particular young person really did struggle with being able to use good language, we'll call it, not language that people will be offended by, maybe. And then if you just flip to the next slide, I hope I've got that in the right order. Yeah. So in order that I wanted to know that they understood what I was talking about, this is what they drew to explain how their brain worked and how they understood what we talked about, that was impacting on their feelings, and therefore it was impacting on them being able to make decisions, and also it was impacting on the words that they used, because their brain hadn't developed in such a way that they were able to use all the same words that everybody else used. So when they were unable to express themselves, instead they would use a swear word. And they knew they weren't supposed to use a swear word, because what they would say, I would say, well, explain it to me. Well, then I'm going to have to swear. And I would say, well, then swear. But you shouldn't hear me swear. But that's all right, because you're not swearing at me. You're explaining a situation. And if you have to use that word in this session, then use that word, because if that's the only way you can express yourself right now, then just use that word. So yeah, so that was just a bit of support to kind of explain that. So play is really important in the work that we do. So in terms of the sessions and the wallpaper, it's all about play with the child. It's all about playing. But if you move to the next slide, because first, oh, sorry, the next slide. I've made a boob there. Yeah. So if we think about the exercise from earlier, and we think about how often we're preoccupied with things, this is a child example of their preoccupation over time. So initially, the one in the top right-hand corner is how they were feeling. So mum was quite a big part of what was in their brain. School was another part of what was in their brain. And that small thing, I can't read anymore, was in their brain. And then there was a bit at the top of the brain which wasn't labelled, if I remember rightly. And then over time, if you look at the one at the bottom, it became school was quite a big thing, revision was quite a big thing, mum became quite a small thing, and me time then started to figure in and became quite a big thing for the child. So it's about, you know, thinking about some of the things that can preoccupy children and children's brains, some of the things that perhaps they might worry about, be concerned about. So initially, mum was a big thing to be worried about, because he was worried about where mum was. This was a male, worried about where mum was, what mum was doing, didn't know where mum was living, hadn't seen mum for a while, and so mum became quite a big worry, wondering about where mum was. And then I think the particular part of the preoccupation that he did at the bottom was around, well, actually, I kind of think mum's been sighted here, and I kind of know where she'll be staying if she's been sighted there. So I'm not worried about her anymore, even though I've not seen her and she's not seen me. I'm not worried about her anymore because I kind of know where she is. And if I wanted to, I would go and knock on that door and say hello to mum. So mum became quite a small thing, but it's quite interesting, isn't it? In the exercise that you've done earlier on, were the things that you've been preoccupied with from the day? Because I know probably in the back of my mind is the fact that I've got a car out there where the tyre might be gone down by the morning, and I'm probably going to have to go and pump it up again. So it's like, what is it that kind of preoccupies your brain? If we think about children who've experienced trauma, there's a lot that preoccupies them. There's a lot of things that you know, that they know, but they might think they're responsible for. There's a lot of shame around, a lot of badness, and the monsters and ghosts, you know, sometimes can be quite heightened in those situations where children are feeling preoccupied by other things. So it's quite hard to concentrate on the things that they might need to concentrate on, like their education and being a child and making friends and playing out. Yeah. So, any questions about the bits that we've just done?
I suppose I'm wondering, how much of this could you do as like a carer or a parent?
Yeah.
How much of it is safe to do, I suppose. People get quite anxious about talking about life. And
yeah, I think play is kind of a big thing, you know, being able to kind of play with your child, looking at understanding their emotions, understanding how they feel when they're angry, how they feel when they're happy, how they feel when they're sad, and kind of letting them sort of understand how you feel, because the life story work journey is, you know, the carer's involved in the work and I'm involved in the work as well. You know, you have to share some of your, you know, some of your stuff in the feelings work as well. I mean, some of the play things, Jenga's a big go-to for us. The Jenga game, you can put questions on a Jenga game, that children have to answer questions when you're pulling a Jenga piece. There's like emotion cards. If you flick onto the next slide, because I think I've got some of the little bits that, no, the next slide, sorry. So it's like, so like mood boards and collages and worry trees with children, because what you're wanting to do is from conversation, you'll be able to understand things that are impacting on the child, and with that, you know, you'll be able to go back, if you're a carer, to say a social worker, for them to kind of get that bit of information so that you can then share that with the child in an appropriate way. We always start where the child's at, so understanding how they're feeling and their kind of feelings is a really important thing, because we need to know, you know, how they're feeling through the work. And through the work, what we tend to do is we tend to ask them to kind of name their feelings onto the wallpaper as we go through each part of the work. I mean, one of the other things that people have done is things like welcome mats. So like, you know, using art to draw like a welcome mat of your home, you know, what your home's like. And you can use welcome mats in so many different ways, because you can think about welcome mats for the past. Well, what was it like in that home? Or you could start with, what would you like your future home to be? Who's going to be there? Who's going to live in it with you? What's it going to look like? So you could start with the future, then look at the present, and then, you know, start thinking about, you know, little bits of the past by using, you know, just little welcome mats that you draw yourself with the child. Trying to think of some other little bits, because Yanni's come up with a good question there. How do you start little bits of the work? So like, so when a child's moving, or has moved, or if you're talking about moves, you could actually make like a box and decorate it, and, you know, kind of turn that into their home. What would they take with them? What prized possessions would they have in this home? And yeah, you know, looking at, are they going to be married? Are they going to be single? Are they going to be cohabiting? Are they going to be, you know, all of those things you can kind of, you know, just talk about, and it just gives conversation, doesn't it? And then you can, you know, the bits that you know about the past, sometimes you can put some of those little bits in to kind of, you know, start a discussion about something else that you want to start a discussion about, but you're doing that through play. So you know very quickly you can take your child back to the safe place, to something else, if you're doing it through play.
I was just going to say something that I know a lot of social workers find really useful is a resource called, and I think it's Social Workers Toolbox. And it's a website. When I send out emails, I will put it at the bottom. But I think it's socialworktoolbox.co.uk, I think, probably. And that's got a range of direct work, sort of discussions and things to generate, things that young children can copy or fill in. And I know a lot of my colleagues use those quite a lot.
I've been looking at that myself. Not heard of that. I've been looking at that myself. I'm just thinking you could, using glitter, make jars and use different colours to represent the feelings, because when the glitter jar is settled, all the feelings are settled, aren't they? But when you become dysregulated or upset, the shaking of that will mix up the different colours and the different feelings, and it's a good visual representation for a child, isn't it? I know somebody else uses salt and chalk and then puts it into a layered see-through jar as well, to also represent the different feelings and how they all get merged in together and mixed together inside people. And that's also a good visual representation for children to sort of look at and understand feelings. So there's no expectation that, they're bad because they get angry or they get upset or they become aggressive. We have to work through our feelings, and it's how, we have people there to support us to work through our feelings. But yeah, play is a real big one, because I think it's one where we always bring the child back to playing a specific game, all kinds of games, hangman, all sorts of stuff, Jenga, whatever, bringing the child back when you've done something that's particularly difficult or requires quite a lot of their attention, or you might be giving challenging news or difficult news, and it's just bringing them back to that game before you sort of move on again. And I think that's the end really of what I kind of wanted to say. I didn't put the end on my slideshow, did I either?
Thank you. That was really interesting. I was just checking whether we got some. Yeah, we've got some questions. Oh my goodness! Because I was sharing my screen, I couldn't see any of them. So we've got Rachel, who's a doctor, Lisa, who's a doctor and social work assistant, Laura, an adoption support worker, Alex, newly qualified social worker, and family practitioner. Sorry, I can't see your first name there. Becky is a family practitioner, and Caitlin is a social work assistant. Lynn works in adoption and undertakes life story work. Are you able, with the proviso of not the photographs of children's work, but would it be okay to send out the PowerPoints of the information?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, without those bits in it. Yeah, absolutely.
And I've got another question. I don't know if this was explained before I managed to connect. What ages are we talking about? Or in other words, how early can you start? is this work appropriate for a 3 or a 4-year-old?
We say 5.
5.
We say
right.
5 to 18 plus.
Right. What sort of discussions could you have with a child earlier than that?
I think that would be an all about me book, really. I think you'd be looking at, you know, the child now in their present. You'd be looking at their present information and what's going on in the present, and having a real understanding of, you know, how they feel in the present, and then looking at doing the life story work kind of thing.
Okay. The All About Me book, I know it is in the social workers toolbox, so I will send out that link. But it's generally about things, asking the child lots of questions about different aspects of their life, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a bit structured, so it's quite helpful.
Yeah, something you do with your primary carer as well. You know, it's not something you're expecting the child to do on their own. They're going to do that with their primary carer.
Right. Okay. Do you meet or work with parents first? How do you ensure parents aren't leading or correcting the child's narrative?
I think what we tend to do is we would tend to have a meeting with anyone who's undertaking the life story work alongside us, just to explain what it is and how we do it. And then prior to sessions, what I've tended to do is rung and explained what I'm going to talk about in that particular session, so that we're clear about, you know, what we're discussing, how that's going to be discussed, and, you know, if there was ever a feeling that people are correcting, then I'd have that discussion in the preparation for the next session again, just to say, you know, that's the child's story, and everyone has a story, and, you know, we have to listen to what they're saying also, because that's their story.
Absolutely. And Alex has asked, what kind of approach would you take for a teenager?
Similar approach, to be fair. You're kind of still building that trust with a teenager, you know, and a lot of it is about building that trust. I mean, I've worked with a young man who, you know, we did the script of, if I'm late, I'm going to ring your carer. And I was late one day, so I was stuck on the motorway, and he, when I arrived, never came out of the room, and he didn't want to come down to session, but the proviso is, I'm here for an hour and I'll stay for an hour, regardless of whether you come downstairs or not. So I'm always prepared. My book was ready, and I sat with my book and just read my book, just went upstairs, said hello, said I'm here, sorry I'm late, I'm going to go downstairs and I'll wait for you to come down. And he came down 5 minutes before the end of the session to 10 minutes before the end to test me out. So we did 5 minutes work, and then I packed away. And he was like, oh, she really is going to leave on time. So it's building that trust with a teenager in order that they're able to get into the work. And I just use lots of playful things, because, like, I just use my inadequacies. So I can't draw, so I draw stick men, and most teenagers don't want you to draw stick men on the life story work. So they either get involved, start drawing, or we look at other ways to make their life story work look a little bit better by using magazines and things like that. So it's just about, you know, meeting them where they're at, and, you know, getting them to sign up to the work. And, you know, it's about them, and it's about them being able to have that narrative for themselves around their life, and understanding that everyone has a story, and that all of that information will kind of be presented. And, you know, yeah, I don't it works the same, because the bottom line is building that trust and building that relationship with that young person.
And I'm mindful that that's quite difficult sometimes, isn't it? Like, particularly with teenagers who've been in care for a significant time, just because they've had so many different people come in and out. So being consistent, actually, you're doing a lot better than many. I think Karthik asked, "Hi, Yoni and Michelle, thanks for a great talk. I was just wondering how most people access life story. Is that life story work, I'm presuming? Is it something recommended for all adopted children?"
Ooh, that's a tricky one. Isn't it?
Mm.
That's a real tricky one, because I can't.
Can I
go on?
Can I answer that? My work, my main job is as a children's social worker at the moment in a looked after child team, and I have to say that there is a standing expectation that all children and young people have life story but work done with them. However, that isn't always what happens. I think it's probably true to say that most adopted children get some element of life story work, but I think it's quite changeable in terms of how in depth that is, how meaningful it is, who does it, and I think sometimes as an adopter, I wish I'd taken ownership of that whole process at the beginning of the adoption and had those discussions throughout, because I think it would have saved us a lot of challenges come teenage years, when particularly one of our daughters just didn't have very much understanding of her life history. And it was only when we met, and that was partly because we didn't have the information, and the life story book that she did have wasn't that helpful. So yeah, I think it's quite changeable and can't always be left to local authorities, if I'm honest. Eleanor, you did have a hand up a while ago. I'm presuming that's a legacy hand. If not, do interrupt me. Amy, as adopters, how best would you be able to access the support to have a practitioner run through this life story work with you or your children?
That would be through funding from Adoption Support Fund, wouldn't it? That's how that works.
I suppose, yeah, you've got probably two options: adoption support work, a support fund, going to your adopting agency, be that within, I think it's still the same, within 3 years, it's the one that assessed you. Yeah. After 3 years, then it'll be the authority local to you, and making an argument for the needs of the child, that they need life story work. I think it's fair to say there is a long wait, and sometimes children can't wait. So you know, I suppose some people are in a position to be able to commission it. If you're not, then they do need to go through the Adoption Support Fund. I saw something from the Adoption UK who said that nearly half of adopters have used or have applied for adoption support funding. Really? Which is staggering, really, but does see what the demands are. Karthik's asked, do siblings tend to do life story work together or individually, or does it vary?
Individually.
Individually.
Yeah, individually, because everyone has a story.
Yeah.
So you know, I'm about to undertake some life story work with a set of siblings at the moment, and I'm still working out how they are going to be separate, but I'm still working out in which way I'm going to have to do this separateness, whether one's going to have to be the day after the other because they see each other quite frequently, but they don't live together. So it's like, how is that going to work? So, yeah.
That's true. And I think it's, having worked with groups of siblings quite a lot, you see that their pathway through care, even if they are removed at the same time because of the different ages, they have different experiences. And sometimes, particularly the older one who will have seen more and been more cognizant of things going in the birth family, will have had a very different experience than perhaps the youngest one who's been removed quite early on. I think just mindful of the time. So if anyone's got any other questions, we've just got a few minutes. If not, if I can, chair's prerogative, if I can ask you, Michelle, do you see a transition in the child throughout the process of doing the life story work? Can you see that?
Yeah, you do. It's really nice. And I attended a conference a couple of weeks ago, and some of the research that's been undertaken around, you know, the changes in child, the changes in carer, the changes in other, say, key workers that are working with the child to do life story work, the changes in some of those workers as well. So yeah, you do see a change with children, in that, you know, you kind of see them becoming much more coherent, much more able to kind of talk about situations and problem solve sometimes things for themselves as well. I mean, I'm trying to see if I can you know, sometimes if children have got difficult things that they want to say to members of their family, you might suggest that they write them a letter. You know, I suggested it was coming up every week, difficulties every week around a particular family member, and I suggested, well, you know, maybe you'd like to write them a letter. So they wrote them a letter, but the letter was they didn't show me the letter, but they took it into school and had quite a lot of swear words in it. And they seemed to ruffle some people's feathers. And then they were kind of saying, oh, well, you know, there's really, really bad language in this letter. And it was like, you know, you should read it. Well, he didn't give it to me, he gave it to you. So I would have to ask if I can look at the letter. No, you can't look at my letter because it's full of bad words and I don't want you to read them. It was like, fine, I'm not going to read it then. But then a couple of weeks later, I was allowed to read the letter. But the letter never went anywhere. That letter was just kept, and that was just their expression of how they were feeling about this particular person. And they wanted to just write their feelings down on paper. And that seemed to, you know, work. Not even sending that letter seemed to work. So you can see where people are, because in the beginning of perhaps our work, we didn't really want to talk about. I got shut down quite quickly when we moved on to a certain member of the family. I got shut down and shut down and shut down. And so that's a big shift when you're able to write a letter, get your feelings out. You know, it might not be a positive letter, but those are his feelings. Hey, who are we to say that he can't have those feelings about that person? So yeah, I have seen, and I can see children make changes, be able to problem solve, look lighter, be happier, you know, have hope, which is the, you know, the main thing when you're working with some children that are really struggling.
And I think more and more, it's the unexpressed emotion and the unarticulated emotion, and like you say, it doesn't always have to go anywhere, but just the act of writing something down makes it really powerful, doesn't it? And whether or not, you know, sadly, a lot of birth parents and a lot of parents, you know, struggle to hear what our children say, and so perhaps actually articulating it might not be safe or possible, but actually expressing it and working it out in your head. Actually, what do I feel? I think I can imagine that's really powerful. So if anyone who's listened to you thinks actually I could really see that you might be able to help, or wants to get to know you a bit more, where would they connect with you, Michelle?
The TLS website. I'm on the TLS website.
Right.
TLSWI. Yeah.
TLSWI.com.
I think it's .com.
Right. Is that a counselling?
No, it's the therapeutic life story work practitioners.
Right.
Website and forum. It's run by Richard Rose.
Right. Okay. I will, like I say, I'll send out that link.
I wasn't thinking
as
about
well.
Advertising my services, so I've not even thought about that.
It's been really good. Just before we sort of draw things to a close, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Michelle. That's really, really useful. I hope people have found it helpful. If you have found it useful, I hope that you'll come to other masterclasses that happen. And if anyone's got any suggestions of things that they'd like us to cover, then please do let me know. I'm running a membership for adopters, foster carers and special guardians called Community Ohana, and this sort of training and community is really taking off. We're doing lots of different activities. We've got monthly training, we've got campfire conversations and support groups, which are facilitated with people who are experts in their field. My experience of support groups sometimes has been that actually it's the loudest and most perhaps negative carers who dominate, and we don't always get an opportunity to talk about our own issues. So and also what I'm really excited about is that we've got didactic developmental psychotherapy course that is part of the membership. So we will have one person who in a household, and it's a joint membership, so it sort of encapsulates two people. One of those people can come on the didactic developmental course, which will be starting on the 25th of October. And I know this course has been transformational for families. It helps parents and adopters so understands the motivations of the children, helps communication, and I'm really excited about offering that. It's worth £700 in itself. We've got the anti-racist adoption course, and relationship-based play course, which Keely and I did, which is an eight session course to help you use play to enhance and build attachment. So I will be sending out information about it. I would love to see you in that membership if you're interested. Any questions, then just hit reply and email me. And yeah, in the chat, if you can let me know whether you found the session useful. That would be really helpful to have some feedback. What I'm going to do, if Michelle, you're okay to hold on for a couple of minutes, what we do at the end of these sessions is that the members of the paid community will just have a couple of minutes with the expert who's joined us. So thank you to everyone else who's joined. I hope you've found it helpful. Thank you, Lynn, really appreciate it. Thank you, Rachel. Really enjoyed speaking to you, and hopefully we're not going to do this in August because yeah, people are busy with holidays and stuff, but September we will have something lined up as well, so if you're on the mailing list you'll hear about that. Thank you, Becky. Caitlin, really helpful. Thank you. Good to see you all. So if members could stay on, just if you've got any other questions, that would be good.
Bye, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
I've just realised it's Karthik, but Melly, and the light has disappeared while I was watching. I didn't even notice. Thanks for the session. I found it really interesting. Sorry, I'm very gloomy.
That's okay, no worries.
But yeah, it was really great to hear. I just had another question. I was just, because obviously from what you're saying, the experience of doing that life story work, you know, therapeutically with somebody is going to be really different depending on your age. And if you're 7 or 17, I think that's going to be quite a different experience. Is it something that you, and obviously I guess it carries on through your life anyway, but is it something that you revisit in that sort of therapeutic setting with the same child, or is there a better time to do it, or like how do you do that?
Is there a better time to do it? No, I wouldn't say there's a better time to do it. I think it's really difficult because, and I say this because I've just had, this is a surprise to me, I've just had 2 referrals for care experienced adults who haven't had life story work. And so that's going to be a challenge. And I don't mean that in the sense of because they're adults. It's just going to be quite a different way of doing life story work, because even though you can do bits of play, because I still play as an adult, you know what I mean? I still play as an adult, got me imagery stuff here. I still play as an adult.
That's good.
So, you know, it's not, that's not going to be the difficult thing, but I'm gonna have to think about that differently. And for that, I've had to go back to the group of life story workers to kind of just say to them, you know, how, has anyone got any ideas? Because I want to make sure that I'm able to do that piece of work for that young person in a positive way. And for one, it might be quite easy, and the other one might be quite easy once they have a conversation with the adult about what they want from the work, because that's probably where I'm going to start. But then that leads me off to think about the fact that, gosh, that's quite powerful, because why don't they know anything at the age of being an adult? So I would say as early as possible would be my thing. You know, I know that the age range is 5 to 18, but you know, as early as possible, because you're looking at the present first, then you're looking at the past, then you're looking at the present, and then you're looking at the future. So the future is, you know, where they are, and just making sure that you always do those updates of what's going on in that child's life, because that's the really positive stuff, isn't it? And you've got all the life story work then to go back and look at in the book when they write the book, because the life book's the last thing that they do. You know, the writing of the book, you do everything on the wallpaper, and then you actually write the book for the child. And if they're, you know, I suppose that there's a difference in books, aren't there? Because if they're 15, some children write their own books at 15. They decide they're always the chief editor of that book. They decide who's going to look at that book, who they're going to share that book with, if they're going to have parts of that book that they don't want other people to see. But ultimately, what I get is that a 15-year-old's book might be a different book than a book for a 7-year-old, because a 15-year-old has got more autonomy on what they want in the book. So back to your question, probably as early as possible.
Yeah.
And I suppose the interpretation and the information changes as they get older and their level of understanding. Certainly that was with my girls, you know, it was very basic what we could tell them initially, because both their mum had drug and alcohol issues. So there was a limit to what we could say when they were very little. But it was, I think, one of the things that, you know, having the discussions early on, you can both, you know, if you're in a relationship, you both have to sign up with how much you share. And if you don't have those discussions, then you don't work those things out. And that was something that I think we could have, you know, my partner and I could have talked about a lot more, because actually we had very different ideas about what should be shared or could be shared.
Well, thank you. Didn't see the light on.
Sorry. So, I mean, I think there's the thing that frustrates me quite a lot, and I know we'll have to let you go in a minute. It sounds like you've got things to sort out this evening.
It'll be fine, the tire.
But I think, like you were saying early on, professionals are so anxious about doing any kind of discussion about children's history that it just never quite gets done, and that is so damaging, because even, you know, I was in a leaving care team, and some of the care leavers didn't know why they were in care, and that's sort of, you know, from whenever to 18, they've been in care all of their or a lot of their childhood, and they should have known. And some things that they thought they knew weren't actually true. And I suppose that's why I do think that carers and adopters, foster carers, probably do need to take a bit more proactive role in it than you might be expected to ordinarily, because you can't necessarily believe that it's going to happen. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Ellie. Yeah, it's been useful.
Yeah, it really has, because I didn't know a huge amount about it before, but it's been really helpful just to understand more about the process. I can see how it would be so helpful for a child as well in that situation to kind of work through it. Thanks very much.
All right.
Cheers.